Okay, hi everyone. Thanks for coming to our webinar. We're the North San Joaquin Valley chapter of the California Native Plant Society, and we've been holding these webinars for several years. So tonight we have a very exciting, oh, I forgot, I'm Cynthia. I should say who I am. I'm Cynthia, and I organize these webinars. And I'll tell you a bit more about the webinars in general, but tonight our speaker is Tina Donnelly from our chapter, and she's going to talk about California water culture, which of course is very interesting to plant people. Is, you know, where's the water coming from, where's it going, and how is it being managed? And oh, if you have any, there's a question in the chat, Mike, I think. I don't know. Anyway,
it says puppy, heart, 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 heart.
If you have any questions, unless they're like really immediate, have to be answered, our plan is to have you put the questions in the chat, and then Mike will read them to Tina at the end of her presentation, and then she will answer them. Okay, so I'm going to move on here. I did that. Yeah, so this is the overview of our webinar series, and this is the little agenda here. So I'm giving the overview. Mike Azevedo, who's also in our chapter on our board, is going to talk about our chapter, and then we'll have our speaker. And just so you all know, we do record every webinar, and we upload it to our YouTube channel, which is at NSJV, North San Joaquin Valley. Or San Joaquin Valley at CNPS. We've done quite a few webinars already. I'm not going to really go through these, but just to show you, there's been quite a few, and all of them are in that YouTube. There's a YouTube playlist in that channel, so you can go look at all the past ones, and we are having quite a few people come to look at them. So this is just one page here of the past ones chronologically. Another page of the chronological past webinars. Still more. Oops, my dog just dropped a bone. And then today, of course, we're having California water culture. We have a speaker lined up for March 11th, which should be really interesting to those of you who are into gardening, which I think many people are. It's going to be an overview of Naturehood, which is a program that the state has put on of gardening webinars, and the speaker will be the responsible person at CNPS who's developed this program. Her name is Anne Marie Bentz, and I thought this would be really interesting because I actually just found out about these webinars a few weeks ago. So they look really useful. And we have a lot of open dates here. If you have a topic that you really want to talk about, we'd love to have you present. You just email me, and my email will appear again in a moment. And all of these dates are open. It's always on the second Monday of the month, except for December. This is our channel. I had to put this sideways. We have about 5,000 views so far, and we have 159 subscribers. And there's just a little, blurb about that. So I already kind of gave you this information. Just to repeat, you know where our YouTube channel is, second Monday evening of each month. And if you have an idea, you want to be a speaker, just email me. That would be best. Okay, now I'm going to pass this to Mike Azevedo, and he's going to talk about our chapter and the tremendous value that CNPS brings.
Okay, let me go ahead and share my screen. Then, there we go. Okay. So actually, because I keep forgetting to do this, I keep saying I'm going to go ahead and put something in chat, and then I forget all about it. So I'm going to go ahead and do that before I get started. Uh, uh, see in chat. I gotta remember where chat is. Oh well.
Mhm.
I'll really try and remember to do this at the end. Let's see. Go back. There we go. I wanted to give you an introduction to our chapter, the North San Joaquin Valley chapter of the California Native Plant Society. The California Native Plant Society is a statewide organization, and you can join it for a regular individual membership of $50. To receive Flora and Artemisia magazines, get benefits such as discounts at certain nursery sales and such, and the ability to join 2 different chapters of CNPS. If you'd like to join the North San Joaquin Valley chapter and one other, such as the Santa Clara Valley chapter, the Sacramento chapter, or others, it will be an option when you go to the link on this slide, which is cnps.org/membership. And speaking of Flora magazine, the latest edition had an article about the native garden project that we just recently had at Oakdale Post Office. And so that's pretty cool. Our chapter had a hand in creating that. We hope that you join us here for the North San Joaquin Valley chapter and whichever other chapter you feel kinship with. I said this membership was $50, but there is an option to choose other price options, and higher membership levels are available for those who are able to help the organization more financially. It's a great cause. The regular membership link is right there, cnps.org/membership. Remember that this is the link to join up. And I should point out that that long bar at the bottom labeled other is for those who want to choose another amount. And notice that the bottom of that barrel is actually $25. Not everyone can afford $50, but we removed the membership level titles, and that includes the low income level that we used to use for $25. So if you want to join for $25 with the magazines and all, but you just can't afford a $50 membership, we still want you to have the opportunity to join us. Just fill that amount, minimum of $25, and you're in for the magazines and everything. And the 7th edition of our newsletter will be coming out very soon. We have articles about native plants, field trips, and virtual events and such. And join us Sunday, February 25th, 2024 at 10 o'clock for a captivating fungi foray at the Valley Oak Recreation Area in Oakdale. Embark on a guided exploration of spring mushrooms with our expert guides, discovering wildlife along the way. Marvel at early blooms and delve into the fascinating world of the mosses and the lichens. This is all age friendly adventure, promises nature filled excitement. Don your comfy shoes, grab water, and embrace the beauty around you. Whether you are a seasoned naturalist or a curious beginner, this is an opportunity to connect with nature. And I should point out that we intend to do everything by email. We recognize that there are some people who actually prefer US mail, and for those who are inconvenienced, we do apologize. But we don't have the financial or volunteer base to put a newsletter out that way yet. CNPS has asked all chapters to find ways of reducing carbon, and saving all that paper is one of our contributions. And if this is a true problem, let us know. So far, no one has complained. And if you're not on our list, you should have received it, but you will receive it. But if you haven't received it and you've been on there for a while, be sure and let me know. And you can do that by emailing me at the it's going to be the email I'm going to put in chat, cnps.nsj.membership@gmail.com. We want our newsletter to get out to everyone. That's our mission, to promote native plants around our region, and our best way of doing this is to keep native plants on everyone's mind through events and presentations and gardening. So we want to keep those of you who haven't joined the statewide organization in the loop, so that perhaps you can join us for an event or two and remind you that we're here. Why care about native plants? We're finding out more and more each day about the true need to restore our environment as much as we can. The man who's been trying to explain the need for native plants with the most eloquence is Doug Ptolemy, a professor from Delaware. He's written 3 books on the subject. I keep thinking it might be 4, might be more, I don't know. But he's written a lot of books, all of which circle around the theme that we have been damaging our environment dramatically, but that there is a hope in native plants. 95% of all birds feed insects to their young, and caterpillars are an important component of that diet, and caterpillars cannot live on non-native plants with few exceptions. Native plants are critical to the ecosystem, and a backyard with no native plants, and that is a devastatingly high percentage of them, are ecological dead zones. Planting native plants in your yards helps moths, butterflies, native bees, and other pollinators, and therefore birds, and the web goes on and on. Our cities need not be devoid of butterflies, moths, and native bees. For more information about this, you can watch this 1-hour video that knocked me over like a brick. This was a talk sponsored actually by our local Audubon chapters just a couple of years ago. And I'm going to go ahead and put the link to this video in chat. It's about an hour, and it has a lot of information, and Doug Ptolemy is a great speaker. So if in the meantime, if you have any questions during the presentation, please add them to chat. We'll do all the questions at the end. Thank you very much, and I'll hand it back to Cynthia. Who is muted? Still muted.
Start. This is Cindy again. I'm going to do a very short introduction of Tina, and then she's going to start her talk. So Tina's in our chapter. We just love to have our chapter members give talks, but we like for anyone to give a talk who has something interesting to say that's related to, of course, native plants. So Tina's been involved in water resources management for 10 years. And as probably some of you, if not all of you know, this is a very complex topic here in California. I don't know if it's like this in other states, but it's very complex here. She has, over the last few years, been presenting water resources management to youth throughout California, so that the next generation, can really fix everything, right? And of course, she's a longtime resident of our Central Valley. So, Tina, I'm going to pass it to you now. You go ahead and take the screen, okay?
Thank you, Cynthia. Let me get this up and running. Tell me when you can see it.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. Well, let's dive right on in. We got a lot to cover and not a lot of time to do it in. I am Tina Donnelly. We're going to talk about California's water culture, an overview of how California's unique waterways have been transformed, how it happened, and what it means. And now, there we go. So what we're going to talk about, well, there's a quick introduction to me in here. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm having a very hard time with my computer. Let's do this. So what we're going to talk about here is California's natural history, early industrialization of California, recent industrialization of California, current water management, and the relationship between the people, the water, and the land. So I would like to note that this is not an in-depth scientific talk. This is a little different probably than a lot of other talks have been in the past for CNPS. We're going to cover a lot of really large ideas, talk about some individuals, but I'm not going to be able to expand on them very much. People study a lot of years to learn a lot of these concepts, but I'm hoping that by the end of this, you'll understand kind of the overarching ideas and the cultural view of water within California. So as Cynthia said, I'm mostly a lifelong Central Valley resident. I have my AS in Water Resources Management. I was a park ranger for the Army Corps of Engineers like 8 or 9 years, something like that. And I've done forestry. I currently am a full-time mommy, but do a lot of volunteer work. I am a lover of salmon fillets and native plants. And for a long time, I specialized in outreach for young students. And I have a picture of the yellow-billed magpie because it's my favorite. And just like me, I can't seem to get out of the valley. So California's natural history, we're going to go a little bit quickly on this, but really what it is going to talk about how very unique California is as far as plants go, and climate and water, all of it. Right here we have a little bit of a map showing that right over in our beautiful little corner, we have 5 different climate types, which is obviously very unique. And the climate itself, I mean, look at this map. It's this perfect little valley right in the middle that just takes care of its plants. So it's a Mediterranean climate, and it has the oldest trees, the largest trees, the tallest trees that you could go and see in the afternoon, drive through a desert and then see a kelp forest. Like, some people call this the California Challenge. Everything is here. And then as far as topography goes, because we have this beautiful Mediterranean climate, we also have these high mountains. The only other place like this, by the way, is like Chile. And it's the only Mediterranean climate that's kind of the extreme of like hot summers, wet winters. But it's so cold up here that we have this natural like holding system of water, and then as it heats up, it sinks down into the valley. I mean, look at that beautiful little spot. And on top of this, we have salmon in California. Since we have that coastline, we have salmon that was unique to the landscape, and it brought fresh ocean nutrients to feed the forest at high elevations. And then it rinsed back down into that valley as the water rinsed out, like, and heated up. So by the time the Central Valley had been there for quite some time, like, that was some of the most delicious, loamy, nutritious soil in the valley with the most perfect weather. So this gave way for an enormous amount of plant variety that stabilized the waterways, and it cleaned the water, and it gave food to people, animals, habitat for wildlife, and then it just kind of held those nutrients there. So what I'm trying to say is California is scientifically really nice. So just to kind of rush through that, like the valley, in case I didn't say, the valley was one big marshland. There was the very infamous Tulare Lake that has come back. The valley was just generally squishy, is the best way to talk about it or describe it. So now we're going to rush into the gold rush, the early industrialization of California. So during the gold rush, if you're from California, or even if you're not, most people know that the gold rush is kind of how everyone rushed into California. There was this promise of like gold paved streets. So in order to build those gold paved streets, they needed lumber. Lumber was needed for the settlement, so that they started to take down the trees, bring them into cities, and then they used the water for hydraulic mining. They also dredged, which is, if you're not familiar with dredging, you basically take this great big machine and you take more or less waterways and you pick them up and move them to the side. And it happened very regularly. There's a lot of areas you can see it. If you see like big piles of gravel, like big hunks of gravel, and there's just kind of grass, that's called a tailing pile. They mined there. That's what that is. It didn't used to look like that, excuse me. They used a lot of chemicals for finding gold. And this is how Jamestown and Sonora were established, which is pretty close to our area. And this is actually a picture of hydraulic mining in California, in Jamestown. And you can imagine that's not quite what it looked like before the gold rush happened. It was a very different landscape. And if you go to Columbia State Park, those really cool climbable columns, like Columbia is now known for its climbing, but the only reason that those limestone columns are available now is because they used hydraulic mining to get all of the dirt out of there. And that's what's left. So that's how people started to rush into the state. And now we're going to talk about a really interesting guy, in my opinion. His name is Henry Miller, the Cattle King. I promise this is relevant. So Henry Miller, he was a German immigrant. He came over here with like $6 in his pocket. And he started by like sweeping shops, and then he became a butcher. Then he got his own shop, and then he decided to kind of expand. And then he just didn't stop expanding. He became a successful butcher who, with the expanding meat prices, took took advantage of the cattle boom. And he did this in a lot of different ways. So to be clear, he is one example of a changing landscape in California. And the reason that he is one of those examples is this very interesting guy who everybody admired, and I admire, because he would buy boat, like by himself, hop in a boat and claim land, utilizing the Swamp and Overflow Land Acts of 1850. I need some water. And this is pretty much what it sounds like. So if you could get to a plot of land by boat, it wasn't accessible by foot because it was covered in water. If you could get there and basically like tack your name on there, it was yours. And he claimed a lot of land this way. He used a lot of different acts. What else did he use? The Homestead Act, the Desert Land Act. He took advantage. He got a lot of land. And then when he started this, there was the no fence law. And the no fence law was essentially like you had all this cattle. Everybody needed the cattle, but there was a lot of wet years, a lot of flooding, and then there was a lot of dry years. So they just kind of let the cattle just do whatever they wanted so that they could get to the grass and be healthy that way. And as people started to claim land and dry it out a little bit, they put in the fence law. The no trespassing law. So he had already acquired tons of land, and he was apparently really, really good at looking at the land and being able to tell like underneath it, like what kind of minerals were there, where was the actual waterway once the water was gone. So he started to put in his fences and made it more established, kind of in the like more modern way that we know what like grazing land looks like. And he built irrigation canals to control the water for grazing and selling this to other landowners. And he was not the only person doing this. He acquired like some 1.2 million acres by the 1900s. And a lot of guys were kind of draining the land, but he was considered to be one of the better men compared to a lot of his cohort. And thinking about like if you were coming into California and looking for a job, like I would probably want to work for a guy like this, like someone who's really worked his way up the ladder and like knew his business. So coming into a very, very changed landscape, he seems like he would be a really good guy to work for. And this kind of brings us into the cultural context of this. People were not thinking about the landscape when they were coming in. Let me try that again. Prior notice. Let me try that all again. Basically, people were moving in and the landscape had changed so much that they had no knowledge of it. People had literally moved natural waterways and their livelihoods became dependent on the agriculture in the community. So the water and the native plants were viewed as an obstacle. Water was literally in the way. They had to move the water out of the way so that they could graze their cattle. But when they did that, they needed to start funding grain. They needed to start growing a lot of grain to feed these cows because they were suddenly holding them into one spot. So when they started to grow grain, what they found underneath it was that delicious, beautiful, very unique soil. So that kind of moves us into the more recent industrialization. And if you haven't figured out, we're going to talk a lot about agriculture. I took this picture. This is in Oakdale. This is a very young walnut orchard. And if you're from the Valley, you're familiar with walnut orchards and you know that this is going to be really pretty one day. But it's not right now. So we're going to talk about the 1910s to about the 2000s. Oops. So if you're in this talk, there's a pretty good chance that you know that California is the #1 ag producer in the nation. Our biggest exports are almonds, generally produce, dairy, beef, rice, cotton. And we're currently as of 2022, we're valued at $58 billion as far as just the ag economy goes. And I think what's really interesting is other states, when they're in their agriculture, they don't have the variety that we do. And we feed like most of the nation. It's a pretty big deal. So with all of this food, we needed to have security as far as like making sure that no matter what the circumstances were, we were still able to export all of this food to any corner of the country, maybe the world. So they started controlling the water with infrastructure. Currently, there's like 1,300, 1,400 dams in California, and there's two main reasons that people build dams. There's irrigation and flood control. So this picture over here was the one in the beginning. This is Goodwin Dam. This is on the lower half of the lower section of the Stanislaus River, just outside of Knights Ferry. And this is called a diversion dam. And if you really look at this, there's a canal down here and there's a canal up here. This was built in 1912. Remember that date. And this canal down on the bottom, it goes to TID, Turlock Irrigation, and then the one up here is South San Joaquin Irrigation District. So essentially they put this in so that they could start shooting water out in different directions to feed the valley. Now, remember, there's a lot of towns and settlements already established when these dams were getting put in. And another reason that we started to build dams was flood control. Now, I've worked on all three of these dams that are listed, and Terminus Dam is down off of the Kaweah River outside of Sequoia National Park. And it is one of the most like unpredictable wild rivers that I think in the nation. It's like one of the fastest watersheds. So that makes it a little dangerous. And below that is, you know, where Tulare Lake was, where now is a lot of agricultural land. So they built this to control the floods specifically and protect homes as well as produce. And then Hogan Dam is on the Calaveras River. And it was originally put in for a variety of reasons, flood control, water, supply, things like that. But in 1955, it failed and it washed the town out essentially. So the city came together and commissioned the Army Corps of Engineers, and they built New Hogan Dam. So if you ever go there and the water gets really low, you can actually see the old dam. It's there. So that's how New Hogan Dam came to be. And that is the two main reasons. There's other reasons probably, but the main ones are irrigation and flood control to control the waterways. And now we're going to talk about Carly V. Porter. I don't know if you guys would know who he is, but he's a pretty big part of California's industrialization. Like he is responsible more or less for the modern day water management. So Mr. Porter was a former chairman of the California Legislature Assembly Committee on Water, and he is responsible for the California Water Project and the Water Quality Control Act. Pretty big deal. The thing about Mr. Porter is he was like a well-meaning guy. Everything I've read about him is he was like trying to seek a better future for California, but he was also seeking the popular vote. And that's important because that means a lot of people wanted the irrigation and diversion dam and canals, all of this infrastructure in place to support their livelihoods. And that was the big push for him putting in the California Water Project. And the Water Quality Control Act, like everybody wants good, clean water. Who are we kidding? So that is how these came to be, is Mr. Porter did that for the people. So now we're going to dive into something that is going to be a little difficult to talk about in such a short amount of time, but we're going to do our best. So we are going to talk about what is a water right. A water right is a legal entitlement authorizing water to be diverted from a specific source and put to beneficial, non-wasteful use. Again, this is not an in-depth talk. If you want to know more about this, I suggest that you read several articles. There's the California Water Impact Network, A Brief History on Water, and it's per the Supreme Court. But essentially, like, what is a water right? What does this mean? What does that mean? So it means it's up to interpretation. What is beneficial, non-wasteful use? that's really hard, because you can argue you're using water for any kind of good or non-wasteful, and like within a group there's probably not going to be a specific consensus. Like if we're all at this talk right now, there's a pretty good chance we're fairly like-minded, and even within us we may not agree on what is beneficial non-wasteful use of water. So California water laws are supposed to be, well, let me do my best on this. Water rights are to be reasonable and beneficial. That's still very loose terminology. Also, water rights are not like owning land, to be clear. You do not own the water. You have the right to use the water for beneficial use. You can't keep it. That's why you're not supposed to put like your rain barrels and stuff. You can keep it for like up to 30 days. You may want to double check, but I'm pretty sure that's what it is. And you cannot degrade it. You can't like purposefully pollute it and then like give it away. That's not allowed. So it's reasonable and beneficial. Again, really hard to nail down that term. Those terms, all of those terms. So water rights have to be arguably non-wasteful. And as far as legal terminology goes, let's just say that judges are not natural resource specialists and they are not farmers. Judges, like, they definitely specialize in something that I don't understand, but there's a pretty good chance that they have not studied waterways, and maybe they do come from farming backgrounds. I shouldn't, assume, but generally that is not their specialty. And as far as legal rights go, that's just something to keep in mind. And the term non-wasteful water use, like non-wasteful water use, that definition has changed over time. As we went through like that history earlier, the best, most beneficial and non-wasteful use of the water was to actually get rid of the water. It was to get like the water off of the land, to make it usable land as opposed to just swamp land. That was the beneficial non-wasteful use at the time. And then it moved into gold mining. The most beneficial use of that water was to use it to gold mine, to just spray it into some limestone columns and get some gold out. That was the best use of water. And now it's agriculture and, domestic use. So let's see, make sure I didn't miss anything here. All right. So now we're going to talk about a few different water rights in California. We have a variety of water rights. Riparian water rights are when your land is adjacent to a moving waterway. It's pretty much what it sounds like. Water can be pulled from a waterway on or adjacent to the land. If it runs through your land or up against your land, like, you can pull out water. That one's a little interesting because you just have to argue that it's being used for beneficial and reasonable use. Like, supposedly, in theory, you're not supposed to pull enough water out of there that you're hurting the natural waterways or the natural resources, things like that. But if you can argue it's beneficial use, the hard part is it's kind of a local mindset agreement. Like, if everyone else is on the same page, that is the reasonable and beneficial use. And then we're going to talk about appropriative pre-1914. Really quickly, 1914 is a very important year as far as water rights in California go. So it's divvied up into pre-1914 and post-1914. Appropriative pre-1914 water rights is non-riparian, so there's no moving water. It might be a puddle, but usually it's groundwater. It's not permitted if water use hasn't changed, which is a little interesting because groundwater wasn't actually monitored or anything until about 100 years after this. So we can't really say if the water use has changed or not, really. And then appropriative post-1914 water rights, they're a little bit more permitted and regulated, but they're still, like, they're not riparian. They're mostly groundwater, sometimes, ponds. And then there's prescriptive. This is not common. It's basically like a squatter's rights or a piggyback on existing appropriative rights. It's not very common, but it is one of the rights in California. Okay, so we're going to do a little case study as far as recent industrialization of California goes. I would like to introduce you to J.G. Boswell. And I'm not going to lie, I may need to up my personal security after talking about him and introducing him to you. Big deal. So a little bit about Mr. J.G. Boswell. He was a wealthy cotton farmer from Georgia, and his water rights, when he came to California, his water rights were established approximately 1906. He's kind of hard to find information on, like specific information. So I encourage you guys to read an LA Times article in 2003. And the article does state like secrecy is a family obsession. And every time I tried to find something, there was small changes source to source on the information. One of the things though that was fairly consistent was he openly blackmailed and bribed congressmen and senates and board members and all these things to get what he wanted and progress his empire. He is responsible more or less for the Pine Flat Dam erection on the Kings River. So he more or less drained Tulare Lake. He's not alive, but I think it's 3 generations in currently this empire, and they grow cotton, pistachios, tomatoes, all sorts of things. If you've driven down to Kings Canyon or Sequoia National Park, or just generally through SoCal, there's a pretty good chance you've seen a lot of what they grow. Let's see if I missed anything. They currently own over 200,000 acres of what was formerly Tulare Lake, and they employ about 5,000 jobs per LinkedIn. When I worked down at Lake Cahuilla with the Army Corps, usually we were allowed to know whose water rights were, like who had what, how much, blah, blah. But whenever I kind of asked about it, I didn't actually know about any of his goings ons or anything. But when I would ask, it was this kind of strange taboo attitude. And it was like not in my best interest to ask. It was very shady. It was really weird. So to be fair, though, imagine you come and look for a job and this guy's pretty established. So he is one of the men responsible for like the recent industrialization in California. But what's really interesting about this is currently there's some water wars going on with Boswell Vidovic, and I don't know if I'm actually saying that name right. I've never heard it said out loud. I've only read it in Vidovic. But the water wars we're going to talk about is they currently disagree over water rights because Boswell is allegedly pumping water out of his very, very deep, expensive wells and placing it into holding ponds for later use. Vidovic allegedly wants to pump the water out of the county. So we're going to talk about this a little bit more, but the Groundwater Sustainability Agency down there, they're working on some plans, and Vidovic is part of Sandridge Partners, which is like his farming that's pumping water, and he is part of the Southwest San Joaquin's Groundwater Sustainability Agency. So Vidovic is recently, like very recently, like right before they were supposed to submit plans and stuff, he made some last minute changes that seemingly targeted Boswell for his farming practices. And then it spiraled out of control. They're going at it legally, like saying, like pointing fingers, like they're doing this, blah, blah. And then they're like harassing each other's cattle with their helicopters. It's wild. So there's an article from 2022 discussing this feud a little bit. This is happening like right now. So water is a big deal. Water rights. There are also a lot of articles, by the way, of small farms and residential homes in the area where their wells are drying out because their wells are not as deep as some of these really big farming empires. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with wells, how they work, but really quickly, if your well is really like deeper than someone else's, the shallow well is going to go dry first. So speaking of, we're going to move into current water management and landscape management. So this is in Mendota, California. This is like South, San Joaquin Valley, and this measured the subsidence, this post right here. These are the years 1925, 1955, 1977. And that's how much it's sank. Subsidence is basically sinking. So we've like that super spongy valley that I described, we're basically sucking the water out, and that's what subsidence is it's subsiding. And then also like near Corcoran, the ground has fallen like some 12 feet since 2007. Pretty wild. So the current water management and landscape management, as far as all that goes, water rights are being examined and rewritten. So recently, you may know, and probably why this is such a big deal is like this talk, water generally, is there's been historic droughts and floods, and that's forcing water management practices to be updated. The infrastructure is being impacted by the sinking basin. That's pretty substantial. And rivers have been legally stolen, and this is getting national attention. So like wells we're talking about drying wells, but wells are also collapsing and then they're getting contaminated. So as humans, we are not privy to the divine design. We've made mistakes, past mistakes, or something that we can learn from. So infrastructure, like I was talking about, is being impacted. Dams are starting to sink, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with how dams work, but like they're pretty dependent on the geography in the area. They're abutments, like they sit there in a very specific space, but if things start shifting, it could be a problem. Roads are falling apart. Like in this picture right here, can you imagine like it just starts pulling apart, right? Roads are falling apart. Then the historic breach of Folsom Dam, it was really old, is really what it came down to, and it endangered a lot of residential homes, so a lot of that is in jeopardy. Then Tulare Lake famously came back, right? And the Merced River theft made the New York Times, so it was a pretty big deal. Like enough people with riparian water rights apparently took a reasonable amount of water to use for beneficial use, and the river went dry. That's really like the only way to put it. But were they wrong? I guess not. So again, water rights are being examined and rewritten. The state has implemented the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act in 2014. So we talked about the 1914 water rights, like that being an important year. 100 years later, they started this regulating, and they have a goal of optimal recharge by like 2040. They're going to do the best they can. So we are the most western state, try and get that right, say that right, I mean, to start regulating our groundwater. Why? We'll talk about that. And local agencies have had to adopt and implement detailed groundwater sustainability plans as of 2022. Like circling back to the Boswell v. DeVick water wars, if they can't reach an agreement, I haven't heard if they've reached an agreement, but the state will essentially take over and make the decisions for them. And this might be really good for small farmers. It might be really bad for small farmers. So water boards generally are trying to be as bipartisan as possible and measurably regulate groundwater to ensure a healthy and sustainable ecosystem so we can keep our natural resources intact and then also feed the nation. That's really probably a big part of this, a sustainable economy for California. Food security. So some of the challenges with these recent changes is a lot of foreign investors see crops as short-term investments. There's an article from farmlandgrab.org describing how, like what I talked about, a lot of deep wells, they're mostly watering nuts, have dried out residential wells, like their neighboring residential wells. So they have no clean water in their houses. This is for sure happening in the southern parts of the valley. But it's exactly what it sounds like as far as foreign investors for crops. Like almonds are famously thirsty and expensive, generally. So if they come in with like their investment, they grow these almonds for a few years and then they bounce out and they get their payout pretty quickly. That's really hard to for them have a lot of accountability and like develop a relationship with the land and the area and things like that. Really hard to regulate those people, or maybe not even people. I'm not sure. I really can't say. So another challenge is infrastructure needs to be updated to ensure groundwater recharge. What that's saying is basically like for a long time, farmers didn't build anything to put water back into the ground other than say flood irrigation, which, excuse me, it does work in a lot of different ways. But essentially they've had to fund infrastructure to get people to get on board with it and be a little less resistant with some of these changes. But infrastructure does need to be updated to ensure groundwater recharge. And then change generally is really hard for people. Like, who are we kidding? Like if I like moved my furniture around, I'm pretty sure I would upset some of my family members. Change is just hard. That's a fact of life. Another thing is special interests can impact regulations, these changing water regulations. So I listened to an interview. I'm trying to figure out how to word this. And it was someone who is basically stating that like commercial farmers should have a place on water boards, but she doesn't understand why conservationists and naturalists have a problem with that. And in the same breath, she was saying that they did not fund a lot of restoration projects and things like that that were found to be really beneficial. And the answer on why a lot of naturalists and conservationists are against big commercial farmers being on water boards is lobbying. Like they do have a lot of knowledge of water and things like that, but the cold hard truth is there's not any immediate payout for conservation. And like if you were to conserve land, you're not going to get money for that. It's kind of expensive, if anything. And then you like all you really get is more water longer. But if you're the only one doing it, then like there's no real payout. That's really hard. So special interests definitely impact a lot of regulations and how they're written and how water is being handled. So this is, of course, a talk on the culture of water in California. So let's take a step back. And we're going to talk about the cultural context, the relationship between the water and the land. So seeing all of that water as an early settler sets the precedent that water supply is not a concern. So I took this picture. This is New Maloney's Lake. I took this a couple weeks ago, but everybody's done this in California. You see a reservoir and you're just like, oh yeah, hands on hips. We're going to have a good water year. Or like if the water's low, you're like, ooh, like water's a little tight. It's like seeing it is definitely how we process that information. So if you're coming in as an early settler and there's just water, like so much water for so long, it really makes you feel like that's not ever going to be a problem. There's always going to be water. And then native plants were seen as an obstacle to success. So the water table was also considered inconvenient. Tulare Lake was actually considered a cursed swampland full of mosquitoes and like not deemed useful in any way, which isn't true. There was a lot of people living there pretty successfully. It was a very healthy area. And then like within my lifetime, we don't need to name any names, numbers, pardon. But people talked about the water table that was kind of a nuisance. Like people would put in their pools and like once their pool was dug out, like the water would come up. You could physically see the water rising up that water table. And it was just like, oh, that dang water table is just too high. I like can't put my pool in and things like that. And then I also remember hearing a lot about like how oak trees were taking away from the water table. Um, so that was a really common thing, a very common theme, that people just viewed the water itself and native plants as an obstacle. So that is a little bit of the cultural context on that. How no one really thought about water being a problem until it was. All right, so a not so graceful leap over here is basically I asked around. I did a little bit of personal research, and within this area, and the top concerns were water storage, sending water to large cities, the cost of water, and food. So water storage, people like there's signs of all over like the southern part of the dam that say the valley that say dam it, which is their thought process is of course like to save water for storage, increase water storage. But we're finding that the cheapest, most efficient way to save water is to put the water back into the ground. Like, why? Because if we do that, we don't have to pay for like repairing dams that are already existing. We don't have to excuse me, we don't have to pay for all the roads that are collapsing and the wells that are collapsing and things like that. And really something that people don't consider is 40 to 60% of our water comes from the ground. 40% on like a decent water year, but 60% on like dry years, which is still like not that much compared to other parts of the country and the world even, but that's still a lot. So if we're pulling water out and then wells are growing dry, we need to put the water back in. So that would be like, since we can't see it though, it's really hard to translate that. Like once it's underground, you can't really see it. So people are like, oh, we don't have water. But we're learning that that's not quite true. Sending water to large cities, I'm not really sure how to talk about that. The only thing I can say is like, I don't know, there's riparian rights that are hard to pin down as well. And like people did move to those areas not really knowing where their water came from or anything like that. It's not like they did it on purpose. But that's yeah, I feel like I don't want to dive into that too much. And then the cost of food and water is definitely a concern, and it might go up. But the alternative of that is no food and no water entirely. One second. So not understanding how this is a concern for people though is also a problem, because people have to make hard and convenient decisions all the time to support their family. It may not be the decision we want to make, but it is the truth. And if people don't understand how like that is a decision that has to be made all the time, that's definitely a privilege. So people are worried about the cost of food and water. So these are the biggest concerns. And then we're going to go into some current examples, like what's going on right now of controversial decisions. So I'm not sure how many of you guys heard, but the Klamath River recently started to remove some dams, and dam removals is a really hot topic, understandably. This right here is a picture of Copco number 2 on the Klamath. And so essentially a lot of the tribal nations in the area wanted to preserve the land and the salmon habitat. So they've finally succeeded as far as taking down these dams, which is great. Try and contain my excitement, but there were definitely a lot of concerns. They talked about, like, there's a few articles, and they talk about, like, will the fish actually return? I'm not going to touch that. You can go to another webinar. They talk about native fish. And then water contamination, that's fair. It, like, there's a lot of stuff sitting back there, but it'll eventually, in theory, wash on down and it is what it is. But one thing that I did think was kind of a fair concern is a lot of small farms were allocated water off of these dams along the river. And there's a good chance a lot of them won't make it without that water allocation. So this is one of the give and takes of removing dams. But you know, hopefully, I'm confident that the fish will come back. Water recycling is another controversial topic. It's actually not really a new phenomenon. All water is technically recycled, but it is controversial. People have a hard time with that. Contamination is new. Some contaminants are new. And then restoration projects are generally controversial. So a lot of us, like here with the Native Plant Society, may not see that, but it is true. So I think it was on the Tuolumne River, they relocated a large amount of homeless people for, you know, some habitat restoration. And in doing that, like they succeeded in some habitat restoration, but they made a lot of people upset as far as like they had a lot more concerns after, like who's going to deal with this this new issue that arose and everything that kind of comes with that. And like, why are our tax dollars paying for this? So yeah, everything has an up and a down. So then current examples of controversial decisions. This hasn't changed at all. This is quite old. Defining non-wasteful water, it can vary within a household. Like my husband might think water is a huge waste on my houseplants. It's just true. So every action has an equal and opposite reaction. Removing dams, there's definitely a time and a place that this is a great idea. It's a great idea. But it's not always a viable thing. This is a picture of Stockton in 1955 from when the dam failed. Getting as fast as I can. And flooding would definitely affect private homes as well as the economy. And a lot of small farms, as we discussed with the Klamath, they may suffer with any new law, and some might be saved. Hopefully, like the water table will even out, and then those shorter wells will be able to get water. So learning as we go. So one thing that I think we should definitely do, like a small change, is discuss groundwater and surface water as one entity. This is kind of being talked about a lot more in regulations, things like that, but something we can do from here on out is do your best. It's hard for me too. I've been doing groundwater versus surface water pretty much as long as I've been talking about water. Again, like we are humans. We're always learning, but there's always room for improvement. Solar panels on canals. This is a small change. It's essentially like putting a solar panel on top of a canal, and then it stops evaporation, and then they have some solar panel. It's like any change is a good change. And then water boards are, as we discussed, implementing these sustainable groundwater practices, and they're incentivizing farmers to hopefully put groundwater back into the water and measure that and give like all these detailed plans. It's very new as far as California goes. So we're learning. And then funding for restoration projects. There's the Dos Rios Ranch and its river partners and Tuolumne River Trust, and they've had really great results. And I guess it's going to be the next state park. That's really exciting, a new state park. And they bought that land. That's really important. It wasn't like someone was like, yeah, you can do a restoration project on my land. They bought it. So someone was very, very excited about this restoration project because they got payout immediately. So looking forward, knowledge is power. So really quickly, I'm going to ask you guys, those of you who grew up in California, how many of you knew where your water came from when you were younger? Like in your formidable years, how many of you knew where your house, like your domestic water came from? So go ahead and put that in the comments, and then at the end of that, in the chat, and I'll see who was able to answer that. But in my experience, my personal experience, talking with a lot of kids, like all over the valley, many people were not taught, and they're still not taught where their water comes from in California. It's very interesting because I have friends from like other parts of the country who always knew where their water came from. And it's just like, really? Like the whole time you just knew? I didn't. I had to go to college to know. But it's just true. So talking about this, like I have friends who are teachers, and they have just started to put in watershed lessons into like middle school. I think it's 6th grade lesson plans, and I didn't learn that in 6th grade. Maybe that dates me a little bit, but I did not. So knowledge is power. Again, the Kroof experiment has shown us a way to increase water is to increase old growth plants. This is an experiment. You can look it up. Basically measuring that if there was more plants, there was also more water, which was actually very contrary to a past way of thinking. People used to think like plants took away water, and we found that that is not true. Also, riparian plants are able to slow down fast moving water, clean it, and then sink it back into the ground. So after we kind of dredged everything, pulled everything out of a lot of the waterways coming out of the hills, when that water like starts coming down, it moves faster than what it probably used to, because a lot of the plants like that held the ground in place and like that good spongy stuff, it was just not there anymore. So riparian plants were very important in stabilizing the ground and holding it in place. So knowing that and keeping that mindset, that will help us. Those big, strong root systems from like an absurd variety of California plants, it was really good to control floods and hold land. So another thing that you guys, everybody should do, talk about this with friends, your loved ones, your next dinner party. Be aware, know who's on your local water board and the decisions that are being made. You know, all of us should get our voices heard for sure. And if you're very passionate about commercial nut farmers being on their water board, you should definitely be aware of what's going on. And another very, very impressive resource is Maven's Notebook. Honestly, after this, I encourage, if you haven't already been on it, I encourage you to go to mavensnotebook.com. It's a comprehensive outlet focused on water news. This is Maven, and it's overwhelming. There's several articles a day on what is going on in the state as far as water news goes. Really cool, beautifully done, beautifully curated. Maven, if you ever see this, I'm a huge fan of your work. It's a little addicting, and they do a really good job like being like bipartisan and all their information and like black and white. I mean, you know, like if you like water, you probably like conservation, but they do a really good job. She does a really good job, and whoever else is working with her. So I'm trying to cruise through this. We're almost done. So what we talked about is California's natural history. California is scientifically really nice. It's really nice here, measurably pleasant, and not just for people in this Mediterranean climate, but plants and animals, all of it. It's really, really nice. The early industrialization of California, that gold rush, that huge surge of people coming into California, and then like the meat boom that like cattle essentially shaped like the wild landscape into what we know today with all those barbed wire fences and designated land, and then like don't go in there type of thing, the no trespassing law, as it were. And then more recent industrialization of California, like agriculture essentially, and then the current water management, which like we definitely glossed over a lot, but we talked about the current water management and how it's been changing, and then hopefully putting context to all of this is the relationship between the people, the water, and the land, and admitting that humans are fallible. Education is definitely a big deal, just talking about water in a different way. Understanding that the native landscape is not actually an obstacle, but maybe a solution to a healthy ecosystem. And then also just like understanding other people's viewpoints, and that if we have this conversation, we can work together and have our economy and our intact ecosystem together. So hopefully that's what everybody kind of got out of this. I hope I lived up to the hype. And that's pretty much it. That was a lot. What time is it? It's 5
About
after.
8:05.
Okay. All right. So do we have any questions, comments?
Well, we do have a few. And obviously at this time, if you have any more questions, please go ahead and put them in chat. Cynthia, did you want to start or?
Well, I just wanted to thank Tina, and also, you know, people in this webinar, some of you seem to have some really interesting information, so everyone might want to take a look at the chat. I mean, this is such a complicated topic, and I don't know. I mean, I think this is really hard to understand water, and you know, I live in Modesto, and I was told, I moved here 3 years ago, and I was told until very recently there weren't even meters on the water. Now, of course, you know, household use is not the main necessarily the main use of water, but you know, people just thought it was like free. So that's my comment. Mike, you want to go ahead and see if you can post some stuff in the chat?
So I think the first thing that was on there was from Norma Wallace, and she first was pointing out the native peoples. Remember, there was a point when you were talking about what settlers found when they first came to the land, and you mentioned, you know, the natural landscape and things like that, and you didn't mention the native people, and I think that got under her skin. So she wanted to make sure that got pointed out, was that there was a lot more than just the water. The water is literally just one part of this, and it's, you know, really sad, but I think it is, you know, an important thing to point out that that this just, you know, what a tragic thing this all has been, but we've been just doing things wrong so much.
No, I definitely agree with that. That was really hard to squeeze a lot in. I did touch on it. People definitely did well before a lot of these big changes came in. So I hope I addressed a little. That's a hard one.
Yeah. I want to bring up Lawrence's question next, which is, why is the city of Lathrop allowed to chop down all the riparian vegetation to make massive levees on the San Joaquin River as they channelize the river?
I'm sorry, you cut out. Can you say that one more time?
Why is the city of Lathrop allowed to chop down all the riparian vegetation to make massive levees on the San Joaquin River as they channelize the river?
Who owns the land? That's a hard question to answer. Let's see. Who owns the land? Probably a lot of the new funding to bulk up a lot of the flood control and things like that. It might have just been due for some upgrades. It's really, I can't answer that. I would need a lot more information.
Let me rephrase it. So when I started working for San Jose and back in the 90s, we had several like high water events that ended up flooding millions of dollars worth of stuff, and they ended up putting in a project where they had the wildlife friendly river that went down, but they had a concrete tube that went around, and when the water rises, it goes into those tubes and goes around, because they've always said that they've always gutterized everything based on the whole idea that the faster water takes more flood water away, and that's always been, I mean, that's why things keep getting guttered up and culverted. And do you know if they're learning from that, if they're at least doing this more wildlife friendly version that couples with the tubes, as opposed to just continuing to gutterize everything?
Learning probably, but bureaucracy is slow. So it seems to be speeding up. Like there's a lot more talk of kind of the natural resources and not fighting the land, for sure, but bureaucracy is slow. I can't say like that's going to be a fast thing.
I want to go back to your statement about that you can't hold water for longer than 30 days, which
Yeah.
does seem kind of wrong. Is there any chance that that kind of thing might get corrected so people can actually save the rainwater that's at least falling right there on their house? Because I can tell you that when it does rain, I get a lot of water. I've got a little bit of the storage kind of thing, but what it is basically built in order to provide for groundwater. So you got like the rock areas where the water just stays and then sinks down to replenish the groundwater, but most of it just goes out into the street.
I would say the only real loopholes is I've seen like where you can dig like kind of a large hole in your yard and fill it full of mulch and put the water in there.
And that's basically what I did. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's part of the verbiage of it's not your right to own water, but to use water. That's the hard part about that verbiage.
I see. And then when I've always heard about water and stuff like that, what I heard about was how Southern California was sucking the water out of Northern California like a straw. And in the chat, Mono Lake was mentioned, and how it's still being sucked away for Southern California. And I know that they literally would go from lake to lake to lake, just depleting it and then moving further forward, as if they really didn't care what they did with their water down there. Do you know if there's any improvements in that respect? I mean, are we at least no longer providing water down there, or is that just, are we going to continue to see Southern California treating Northern California like a bucket of water?
I don't personally see that changing. No, they got the money. Is it fair? No, I don't agree with it. That's kind of why I didn't go into it. But there's a lot of money down there, and if they can pay for it, California's, I don't know. The only thing is it would be a slow change. That's why we'd need to know who's on our water boards and what they're fighting for. And maybe make that slow change as far as like either they pay a lot more for it so that they're being aware of like how much they're using, or stop it altogether. It's a hard one. It's a really, really big legal battle that I'm like, I don't know if I'm really willing to talk about being recorded, I guess.
Norma is saying, did I hear that right? You cannot have rain barrels? Is that because you said no storage of water for 30 days, and that's what I'm talking about, and I took that to mean you can't even store it in rain barrels. So so I guess I'm repeating her question. Is that right?
I mean,
technically,
legally.
Yeah, are they gonna
I
come
think
on your line and say you've had this water for longer than 30 days, you have to get rid of it?
Yeah, I don't think they're gonna come or anything like that, but that is what the law says.
Okay. And then another thing you said that, and by the way, a lot of what you said just makes me want to throttle someone. you kept saying things like, and here we were talking about recycled water. How is that controversial? How is
it is
water
I asked around. It just is because they're recycling sewage water. They're going to put it back like into rivers, and some of it's going to be used in drinking waters and like emergencies. But honestly, like it's not a new phenomenon, but it is controversial. It's icky to think about, but if we clean our water right, it's okay.
I had heard at some point that they were supposed to get the filtering process so good that they were going to be right now, or at least the last I heard about it, there was a lot of nitrates that go in the recycled water to the point where you literally kill your redwood trees if you use recycled water on it, because there's so much nitrates on it. But if you put it in the right place, boy, your plants just grow really fast because there's so many nitrates. So so I'm Obviously, I understand the whole thing about why I wouldn't want to be drinking recycled sewage water, but on the other hand, we have so many different places that we put water, especially thankfully they're doing things on parks and elsewhere where they're using recycled water for landscape and stuff like that. But I know of at least one, like Arcata Marsh, which is basically at the end of the tertiary process of recycling water. Of the water is coming out and it's going in and doing a great job of being um, a wildlife generate. I mean, literally, it's a marsh, and the
Hey,
birds love it.
Mike, we've got a lot of comments here, and some people asking questions that are just have some interesting knowledge. So I think we should go back here. Let's see, Chris Link just suggested that conservancies or similar groups try and purchase water rights or riparian land with the goal of preservation, or would the cost be too high to even attempt it? I think that's true. I don't know, but it's an interesting idea. And then John Herrick is saying there's a professor at Stanislaus State that has, I guess he's written a book called The Fall and the Rise of the Wetlands of California's Great Central Valley. That'd be interesting because, until Tina actually gave her, I listened to the Dry Run, the talk, I knew that there was a lot of wetlands here, but I didn't realize the whole thing was just one big wetland, the whole Central Valley. So let's see what else. Yeah, and the whole thing about these, let's see, someone mentioned, Lawrence, I think that these crops that you see around us, especially the almonds and pistachios, I don't know how much pistachio there is, these are incredibly thirsty trees and much more thirsty than the stone fruits. So, that whole thing is all driven by economics. Does anyone know anything more about that? I mean, I think that's a very interesting topic. If someone knows something more about the whole almond situation.
Megan has a question on here. How is it best to get involved, educated, informed for local water boards? And are these municipal, county, state, private, or a combo? I'm completely unfamiliar.
Usually that's got like a county name to it, or like if you Google like who your utilities come from and then the water district, you should pretty quickly be able to get to the board members and then find out when their meetings are. And I personally tried to start slow, listening in on meetings and then getting a little bit more involved that way. But every one of them is different. And then like we talked about, like local mindsets is a big part of it. It may not be written down somewhere, but there's like some sort of unspoken, agreed upon thing. So that's why I started small and listening in on meetings.
John Herrick mentioned CSU Stanislaus history professor Philip Groan's The Fall and Rise. Is that what you talked about, Cynthia?
I already mentioned that, yeah.
Okay, okay, you mentioned that.
I think that would be really interesting too. I assume that's a book, right? That would be really interesting to look at. And here's someone originally from Germany that's saying, in Germany they're very strict about new buildings have to have a green roofs and solar panels. And is that true here? Well, it's obviously not. You look at all these tract homes they're putting up. I mean, no, doesn't seem to be.
Do you have a comment? Another one of Norma's comments was dam failure is not equal to dam removal. Do you have a comment on that?
Well, first off, Norma, I'm not educated very well on like a lot of the topics you discussed earlier as far as the Native people, so I didn't want to speak on it. Obviously, that didn't work out either. Sorry. But as far as dam removal is not equal to dam failure, no. I mean, I'm trying to be as bipartisan as possible and give the information from all angles. Yeah, I try not to live in a floodplain myself, but a big concern as far as the culture in California is paying for those dam failures. That's a concern of a lot of people.
Lisa Frost points out that there was some laws passed by Jerry Brown to allow water storage, that she just Googled it.
I'm sorry?
So there have been some laws passed during the Jerry Brown administration that allow for water storage.
I think
That's what
that was
she
the
said.
30 days, but I don't know. I might be missing the mark on that.
Okay.
But one thing I can say from Mike, let me say something, from just being a homeowner, and I thought, oh, rain barrel is good, right? And well, I put in rain barrels because, you know, when the rain comes, it's like crazy, and it was all creating a flood. But of course, the rain barrels fill up in like no time at all. And what I really am using them for is to divert that water out to the middle of the yard so it doesn't just flood the patio. But it's really impossible for us to store enough rainwater to like last through probably a week of the summer. You know, it's rain barrels, I don't think, are very useful in California where it's really dry.
I wasn't necessarily paying as much attention as I should. Did you already ask Anya's question about the rainwater and how she mentioned Austria?
Yeah, I mentioned that.
You mentioned that one.
I mentioned it, yeah.
Yeah, okay, sorry. So I'm getting caught up. And
Oh, here's something. And Norma, someone just published something really interesting that says it's let me see this. Hey, you know, we saved the chat. If anyone wants to chat, because there's a lot of interesting things here, just send me an email.
I do want to. Sorry.
Cynthia.ca.nativeplants@gmail.com. Go ahead, Tina.
I did want to try and scoot through these chats to see who answered my question earlier about those of you from California. I'm trying to go through here who were taught where their water came from. I'm not sure if
that was a really good question, because what I was saying was when I lived in Pacifica, they made it very clear that it came from Hetch Hetchy, but frankly, that wasn't enough information, because there was, you know, there's a lot more information that I really should know about where my water comes from, or, you know, where my garbage goes, or where, you know, there's so many different things that people just don't know. You know, the truth is right now, I can't tell you where my water comes from, you know, but I'm no longer in the Bay Area. It's not from Hetch Hetchy anymore. So, but that would be, it's a really good point. I mean, everybody ought to know where their water comes from.
Yeah, it says Diana Loomis taught 3rd grade, and she taught Don Pedro and Tuolumne River. I think that's the only one I see. That's great, though. Thank you for doing that.
Well, there was actually a bunch of people said where they came from.
Okay.
Most of them, a lot of them said they didn't know. I did grew up in near Lake Ruby. Grew up near Lake Mendocino and the Russian River, where my water came from. Yes, Gina. Yes, grew up in Marin, and we visited the system of reservoirs on Mount Tam with family and school trips. And then Stephanie, no, we were taught in the 60s and 70s. Oh, not taught in the 60s and 70s. Lawrence said he did Hetch Hetchy. Megan says Oroville. And Norma said, yeah, San Francisco, it was Hetch Hetchy. And Darren, raised in Bakersfield, had not a clue. Lauren said she didn't know, neither did Deidre. And going back down, Jorge said, I didn't know either. Rick said East Bay Mud made it clear the source was the McCollumney.
Is it okay to just ask a question off mute? Is that fine?
Go ahead.
Hey, I did not know I was going to stumble across such a cool meeting tonight. Thank you for presenting, Tina. This is the first time that I've come to a CNPS event.
Thank you.
Super interesting information, like, damn, pun intended. But I remember I grew up in California, and I remember water conservation in households being a really big thing around my town, which was in East Bay. I grew up in Lafayette, California. And I just wondered if you think that water conservation in households is something that we should still be kind of spreading the word about and focusing on, and like, telling our friends and family to do. Obviously, everyone should live in moderation to the best of their ability, but I just remember that, like, feeling the blame as a child for water lacking in California. And I feel like I've learned so much about how that's, my showers weren't probably the reason for that.
Your showers definitely weren't the reason for it, but I would say the biggest like the good positive thing on that is like just bringing to the forefront of your mind like water usage. Residential use is not like a big impact as far as like droughts go, but it is a good learning tool for the long term. I conserve water, so I feel good about myself. But it would mostly be like commercial farming. What else? A lot of industrial plants, the big corporations. They're the big ones.
Yeah, and then I
But
kind of had
also learning that.
Yeah, and then I kind of had a follow-up question about that, which was like, is there any particular, like, without trying to attack them in any way, is there any particular ag industry that you've noticed is like just not super great with water conservation and could be better, and that could use some people to help out with their techniques?
The ones that probably need the help the most may not want our help. But big ones, usually it's just the big almond companies. What is it? I can see it's the blue diamond. Those are some of the ones with like the short-term investors. The hard part is like the short-term investing. Not like a whole lot of accountability. And I think California as a whole has decided to force their hand, because you can't live on just nuts. I mean, maybe, but also like if we're not even keeping them here, not really, right? Like I think I did see it in here. Yeah, a lot of the almonds, like, and nuts generally, they don't stay in the country. But California is starting to force the hand. So they may not have a choice soon, but to conserve. Well, that's at least the goal. They might find loopholes, but that is the goal, to force them to conserve water.
Deidre, how did you hear about this?
So, Tina, I want to thank you again. We always end right at 8:30, so I'm going to be turning off the recording, but you can stay as long as you want. Tina, do you want to have any last words for everyone?
I really hope you enjoyed this. I do understand this was a lot in a very short amount of time. So I did my best.
Okay, so I'm just going to turn off the recording, and everyone can stay and continue to discuss. You can unmute yourself if you want to talk in person.
All right. Thank you.
I know Lawrence had a question he's dying to ask. He's wondering where